Today, palm oil covers 90% of some municipalities in Guatemala. Palm oil to large numbers of the American audience is unknown in terms of its uses and the devastating impact it can have on the environment and on communities. But today, it is one of the fastest growing agricultural industries within the country. Palm oil has not been a problem just for Guatemala. It's been a problem for Colombia, Nicaragua, Honduras, and especially Indonesia and Malaysia. So what's the big deal with palm oil? Why is this such a bad thing? Palm oil is very important to understand in that it goes into detergents, soaps, and a large number of cleaning products and other industrial uses and the occasional food human consumption use. Palm oil takes up large amounts of land. It requires the clear cutting of rainforests and uses a lot of water and produces a highly concentrated waste product which is often dumped into rivers and is not properly maintained or decontaminated, leading to water pollution and contamination, which can kill off thousands of animals, fish, plants, and can severely impact the drinking water for millions of people. Today I'm going to be talking about how palm oil has grown in Guatemala, where it has grown, and who are facing these most devastating effects of palm oil. First and foremost, it's important to understand the geographical context that Guatemala sits in. Guatemala historically has been split between a mountainous highland southern area with a Pacific plain, a northern flat area known as the Petén, and its far eastern edge, which is lower hilly mountains and more coastal rainforest type of feel. Within Guatemala, throughout its history, there have been a number of disputes and even coups over plantation and plantation agriculture, most notably the 1954 coup of President Jacobo Arbenz, during which United Fruit Company asked the CIA to overthrow him as he was trying to reinstate land reform that would take corporately held land by United Fruit Company and give it back to local peasants. Today in Guatemala, instead of bananas, the main cash crop is palm oil. And palm oil is a very, very vicious product which is taking away the land for commercial use, for local farmers, and is polluting bodies of water that extend into foreign countries like Mexico, Honduras, Belize, and El Salvador. It's really important to understand this context that Guatemala sits in, as it is really crucial in understanding what palm oil is affecting and who is being affected by it most. Most importantly, within Guatemala, there's this one region called the Northern Strip, or Transversal Norte, which covers states of Petén, Alta Verapaz, Izabal, Quiché, and San Marcos. These departments combine into a region that is largely undeveloped, but that has great potential for hydroelectric development, mining, and for large-scale agriculture. This area was historically very affected during the coup and civil war, and was also where a number of genocides occurred during the civil war in Guatemala, which lasted between 1960 and 1996, making it one of the longest-lasting civil wars on record in the world. It's really important to understand that within these areas, some are more affected by palm oil than others. While there is palm oil along the southern Pacific coast, most palm oil today is concentrated within Izabal, the Petén, and Alta Verapaz, with certain regions like Sayache and Puerto Barrios being more affected by palm oil. Within the graphic you can see that Sayache has 11.12% of its land covered by palm oil. The palm oil within Sayache has recently sprung up, and it's also where we're seeing the largest concessions of palm oil today given by the government to plantation companies that come in, clear-cut rainforest, and turn land that was once held by local indigenous farmers into corporate land where these people are forced to work for low wages and where they are exposed daily to contamination and pollutants, which can severely affect their health and the health of their future offspring. It's also important to understand that these main regions of palm oil production are sitting along major bodies of water that affect the drinking water of thousands, if not millions, of people. In the Petén and Alta Verapaz, the main river, the Usumacinta, feeds from central Guatemala up into Mexico to the Gulf of Campeche. In the state of Campeche and in Tabasco, cities like Emiliano Zapata Other cities within Tabasco and Campeche get their water from the Rio Usumacinta. And it's really important to understand the context this is playing into, in that the water that you're drinking is coming from areas where you're seeing expanded growth of palm oil plantations. The water and wastewater produced from these plantations when the palm oil is processed, which usually occurs on site, is highly polluted with concentrated byproducts from the palm oil, which is then released back into the river and sent downstream towards these cities where these people are drinking this contaminated water. Now, one could say, isn't it the fault of the Mexican government, the Guatemalan government, for not having strong enough wastewater treatment systems or drinking water treatment systems that make sure that the water that people are drinking in these communities is safe to drink? While this is an important factor and is something that developmentally these countries need to achieve at some point, it's important to understand that cleaning this drinking water is very expensive, and that in a country where a lot of the people may not have access to electricity or education, getting clean drinking water might not be the first priority, but it should be the priority of these companies to not pollute these rivers, as by polluting these rivers, they're affecting the livelihoods of thousands of people. On the more eastern edge of Guatemala, you have the Rio Motagua. The Rio Motagua drains the capital city, Guatemala City, and feeds into the Caribbean Sea. This river is very important historically for having the capital city at the headwaters of the Rio Motagua, and also it's one of the largest rivers in the country, where thousands of people between the capital and the Caribbean Sea get their drinking water, and where they wash their clothes, and where a lot of commercial agriculture and local agriculture is conducted. This is another area where we're seeing a rapid expansion of palm oil plantations, especially in the department of Izabal and around the city and municipality of Puerto Barrios. And it's also an area where there's a large population of indigenous people and of black people within Guatemala. This area is historically very important as one of the few areas where the British colonized in Guatemala, and is historically and culturally apart from the rest of the country. When these communities are facing polluted drinking water and losing their farming lands and agricultural lands and whole towns to palm oil plantation expansion, these communities are displaced and the cultural heart of this area is really disrupted. To gather all this information that I have just mentioned, I used two main methods: mostly open source software, so using Google Maps and Google Earth, and through the overlaying of satellite imagery to trace out the borders of palm oil plantations that I identified by hand, and to then superimpose them onto a map of Guatemala, including maps of municipalities and of departments. With that, I then overlaid watershed basin information and figured out which watersheds are most affected and which watersheds downstream of these palm oil plantations might be affected. As the pollution does not just stay within the municipality, it spreads out towards the ocean, meaning that bodies of water that feed into the Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea are all affected by the spread of palm oil plantations. This also plays into the whole watershed issue, into the pollution that extends across international boundaries, with pollution from Guatemala reaching into Mexico, Honduras, Belize, and El Salvador. With all of this, it's really important to understand that to help people within Guatemala and to help combat this pollution, we need to understand what palm oil is being used for, and we need to push for companies that grow palm oil and use palm oil in their products to ensure that the people producing the palm oil are cleaning the products carefully and are making sure that the palm oil pollution, is properly disposed of. By ensuring that these tactics are being followed, we can make sure that palm oil in the future is less destructive, and it might even be necessary for us to look past palm oil and to use other alternative agricultural products for cleaning products and detergents. Because as we have seen across the world within Indonesia, Colombia, Honduras, and Nicaragua, palm oil affects populations around the world, and it especially affects poor communities, rural communities, and indigenous communities on this planet. Guatemala is no exception. While this is where the fastest number of palm oil plantations are growing today, It is also where we can make some of the largest impacts to stop its expansion and to ensure that future generations of Guatemalans, indigenous or otherwise, are protected and that they do not have to face the long-standing and long-lasting pollution issues caused by palm oil. Thank you.